All right, we are live. Good morning, everyone. Uh, good morning to those who are in Manila. For those of you on a different timeline of you, obviously, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. All right. So, welcome to our session today. We do have a number of people already watching. So, thank you for joining. And if you want, you can also share this link later on to some of the people that you know would find value in what we're going to talk about. And the reason we're talking about this is because many of our effort, many a lot of efforts go into talent management, and I wanted to do this just to be able to help some of you to get that started, which is why our title has always been Jumpstarting the Talent Management Process. It's not an easy task, but it is something that's necessary to do. All right, so let's get it started. I did want to ask first, how many of you um, are here for for which reason you are here in this session today. We do. There's just a few who are in the chat box right now, so I'm not sure if we're going to hear anyone at the moment, but I'm sure many of you are interested or logging into this session because again there's a lot of things that you want to do with your talent management process, primarily to get it started maybe, or finding out how to make it even better or stronger. And talent actually is actually really very important. Like we know for a fact that much of our time as either HR managers, leaders, or professionals, much of our time, resources, and energy goes into managing talent, right? And we need to do that because this talent obviously affects so many things in our organization, in our work, in our professional lives. It affects our customers, it affects our processes, and also it affects our outcomes. And so this is why it's very important to really focus on that aspect, right? Now, what is talent in the first place? What is talent? Why do we need to? We need to have a working definition first, obviously, before we can get ahead of the class. All right, the webinar. Right. So let's get into that definition now. So a talent, um, it's it's been around for a couple of years, and it's really much more popular as a term used right now in HR, human resource, right? And the way we define it, or at least I define it, and hopefully we do align here, and if not, you'll want to use this definition much more closely because it already allows you to actually manage talent right off the bat with this definition. All right. So first, talent are individuals with above average skills that help them perform better than the rest. So at this point, you know already just by this definition, it's really set apart. Okay. It's set apart because it's not going to be everybody in an organization. Definitely, everybody has value, but the talent, because they have above skills, they're the ones that you really want to manage because they're the ones that you want to put a lot of your time, effort, and resources to. Because they also affect again our customers, our processes, and our outcomes or results. And if you think about it, talent management is fairly easy, right? I bet in your own practice you do a little bit of what I'm going to show you as a typical model of talent management. Usually it starts with, first, number one, defining talent requirements. Number two, assess talent quality. And number three, realize talent potential. And number four, evaluate talent effectiveness. Summarized very clearly with the acronym DARE. So this is actually what we call the DARE model. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this one or use a version of this, but very simply, that's what it takes to do talent management, right? In defining talent requirements, you're really just specifying what are your standards for a talent. In other words, what makes somebody a talent, what makes somebody that person, that individual that shows above average skill, that gives value far beyond what you expect them to. And these standards could either be performance standards, competency or skill standards, or even their level of engagement, how much they're involved in an organization. And it's important that you start out with this because then you're able to tell who is the talent that really you need to manage. Not everybody will match the performance criteria, the competency criteria, or even the engagement criteria. So out of 10 employees, maybe five of them match your definition of what a talent is. So they're the ones that go into the next step of talent management, which is to assess them. So here you want to know the kind of quality they have in terms of performance. So by doing an evaluation, competency assessment, and even their level of engagement. And here you'll be able to find the gap. And the gap is what you begin closing at the third step. Wherein you now want to realize the potential of that talent since they meet your earlier requirements and they happen to demonstrate a little bit of gaps if there are any, and if there's none, you immediately go into step four, obviously. But if there are some gaps at step three, you realize their potential by doing some learning and development, a couple of mentoring programs, maybe, and even do some work on talent capitalization. And after this step, obviously, what you want to do now is evaluate their effectiveness. Step three usually takes a little bit more time, maybe around um, 6 or even a year, depending on the gap actually and the depth of the gap. So the range and the depth. But you ultimately come to stage four or step four, wherein you evaluate the effectiveness both of your realization, maybe also of your assessment, and also maybe even of your definition. And here, once you do your evaluation, that's when you decide to do some of your continuing development, some of your career planning. For example, you find out when you realize the talent potential, oh, this talent can go into this other role because of their value, or even talent placement. So in a nutshell, that's what talent management is, right? And I kind of imagine that for some of you, or for many of you, maybe you're already doing this. But in this session, I'd like us to to think about a I'd like to bring forward a different view, and it has to do with the word linchpin. Um, and linchpin is something that looks like this. I don't know how many are familiar with a linchpin, uh, but it is all right. So we're getting some conversations over chat. First time to hear linchpin. Is that something that you use for the hair? All right. So it's not something that we use for the hair. A pin would, but a linchpin actually belongs more closely into uh, not exactly vehicle, but it is associated with a wheel. So let me get to that by giving an example, right? So first, let's talk about what a linchpin is. Let's say you have a wheel, right? And then you have the spokes of the wheel, and then at the center you have your disc, right? Now I'm not sure if that's what it's called. We're just simplifying things. I know that you get it already, but for some of you who are experts out there, you probably call this part a different name, but it all really is a wheel, right? Now, a wheel on its own might not require a linchpin as much as when it needs to be attached to another wheel. So let's give that example now. So let's say we have that one wheel and then we have another wheel. And obviously we want to connect both of these wheels together, right? So we're going to have them connected with what we call a rod. I think in uh, in automobile parlance, you call it a strut. Again, I'm not so sure, but you get the point, right? We just need them to be connected. Now, in their connection, as the rod passes through the disc of that first wheel and also of the other wheel, that's where you want to put what we call the linchpin. So if you think about it, a linchpin is something that holds something in place. All right, we have comments over chat. It's a hub. Oh, I'm not sure if that's what it is, but if it is, yep, you get the idea, right? So a hub. Uh, so that's what a linchpin is. So if you looking at this, if that linchpin, however, is taken out, what happens is the rod that passes through this wheel and to the other wheel ultimately gets misplaced or out of place, and then it actually destroys the integrity of that entire wheel. So it creates that compromise. And that's what a linchpin is, right? So a linchpin is something that holds the elements of a structure together. And the reason I'm bringing up this definition because I think it fits nicely into the concept of talent management. It gives us a new perspective, a new idea, or even a new approach into talent management simply by focusing on either that something, and that something could be people or positions that hold the elements of your organization together. And once that idea is made or concept is made clear to you, that actually just makes the idea or concept of talent management just even clearer, easier, and more practical, right? So let's continue. So in organization parlance or in talent management parlance, there will be two types of linchpins that you want to look at. Hello, also from we do have somebody saying hello, and that's JR Pogoy of DepEd. Hello, sir. So, na-plug na kita ngayon bigla on the screen. Thank you. Uh, anyway, so two kinds of linchpins. All right. So, number one, we have linchpin positions, and then we also have linchpin talents. Okay. So, obviously, when we say linchpin positions, these are positions that hold everything together in an organization. Or talents, these are the people that hold the organization together. Now, I'm using organization, but you can actually, that actually could be a fill in for anything within the overall structure of an institute. It could be the person or the position holds together the mission, the person or the position holds together the certain operations, the person or the mission holds together maybe even the entire community of the organization. And really that's what a linchpin means. Okay. So let's start first with linchpin positions. Now, um, now you could have many reasons or many standards, again, going back to our DARE model, many reasons or criteria of what makes a position a linchpin one. We do have just a couple of people in the chat room, but some of you can probably share some answers if you do know or if you'd like to share. But if that's not coming through, let me get ahead of that. Okay, so for linchpin position, and these are just some of the criteria by which you can distinguish which positions are critical. A question over chat, sorry. All right, so a question over chat. Aren't all positions in an organization linchpin? That's actually very good question. But I think what you mean to say is aren't all positions in an organization critical? Yes. Um, every position is an organization because it serves a purpose, right? But a linchpin is again something that's set apart. If we go back to our illustration earlier about the wheel, one position could be a spoke, another position could be the disc, position could actually be the wheel in that structure. However, the linchpin, it's the position that holds everything in place. So there's really a difference. Everybody plays a role, but that linchpin is actually very critical because it's the one that holds everything together, and that's what we mean when we say when we distinguish a linchpin from all other positions. And it's not to say that some positions are not important or not valuable in an organization, because they are. Uh, it's to say that there are really just certain positions that have uh, that really hold things together. And there are no rules, by the way, of how this linchpin is defined. You actually create your own rules or standards or specifications around that. Here, for example, here are my examples of criteria that can help you identify which positions could be the linchpin ones. And you'll understand that it's not going to be every position, right? So here's an example. So number one, a position could be a linchpin one because it's mandated. In other words, there's a law that specifies this position in the organization should be present. In a private entity, these positions could be the president, the secretary, the treasurer, right? The first five positions for any company that you're starting with. In a government agency, a government sector, for example, it could be those positions that are closely related to the mandate of that government institution. So that's one. I think that's one um, clear criteria that can distinguish which position is a linchpin one versus other positions. Again, all positions are important, but you set them apart and define them or tag them as linchpin because of certain um, certain indicators. And one of them could be this one. It's a mandated position. Another could be that position is responsible for strategic initiatives. So you can imagine already just by this definition alone, if that position is not tagged as linchpin, it's not something that you want to focus on in talent management, that it can derail the organization because it's the one in possession or responsible for strategic objectives and initiatives. And a third example could be core to operations. Uh, example I can give here is, for example, if the organization is a sorry, this is the first organization that came to mind. No? If the organization is a scientific organization, obviously the ones that are core to that organization would be scientists and researchers, analysts, for example, and all the other positions that support the work of these scientists and researchers would not be really core. They're just there to support. So already between the two, let's say what supports these scientists would be HR, accounting. Uh, so the researchers, because of the nature of the organization, it's scientific, they're core to the organization. These other positions, however, are not core. You can practically outsource them, right? Because if these researchers are not part of the organization, again, the wheel collapses. So if you think about it, core that definition, core to operations, actually is very useful in distinguishing again linchpin positions. What's great about this, however, is that again you can use them as your criteria to determine which positions are these linchpin ones. So there could be, let's say, in my example here, we're going to show about three positions: position A, B, and C. And using the criteria that we specified, maybe position A is, let's give them 1 point out of 3 points. Three is the maximum here. Obviously, you can make a scale as high as 10 maybe. But just to make things easier, maybe a scale of 1 to 5 is okay. Where in our example today, we're just using a scale of 1 to 3. But let's say we're going to give 1 point for this position because the law doesn't require it. It's not part of the bylaws of the organization. So it is not actually mandated. So one could mean it matches the criteria at a very low degree. So one. But when it comes to responsibility for strategic objectives, however, it's a little bit at number two because while maybe this position doesn't own a strategic objective, it probably owns an operational one. So that definitely has a value that leads to the strategic one, right? So let's give it around 2 points. And then core to the operations, let's say again, it's 1 point. Um, so it's a position that can be outsourced. And many organizations have done that, right? Because they've sort of done their own evaluation of certain positions and they found out, this position we can outsource it. This position we can assign it to an agency. And that's some of the things that you do, or an outcome of an evaluation such as this. And let's say we continue doing that for position B. Same, it's also not mandated, but it is responsible for a strategic objective and it's somewhat core to the operations. It could be, let's say, a position that is in between the more, going back to our scientific agency or organization. It could be a position that straddles in between. A researcher position could actually be a 2 versus the scientist would be a 3, right? And let's say position three, it's a mandated, it's responsible for strategic objectives or initiatives, and it's core to operations. So among these three, it's clear to you that your talent management efforts should really focus on position C because it's a linchpin. It's mandated, it's responsible for strategic objectives, it's core to operations. So immediately, just by this exercise alone, you now know which to focus on, where your time, energy, and resources should go, and which position might have a large impact to your operations, processes, and your outcomes. But that's just half of the equation. The other half, of course, are linchpin talents, right? So in linchpin talents, we do the same thing. We create or specify our criteria. So let's say, and this has to do more with the person, with people now, and it's. I know that maybe in some of your organizations, in some of our organizations, wait, let me just go back to this slide and let's go back here. In some organizations, for example, even if some people occupy a not so critical position, the person who happens to occupy it is greater than the position. I hope I'm getting across, right? Because that's possible. I've met, for example, in some organizations, they occupy, let's say, just a um, sorry for the word just, but when I say just, you sometimes we think of that position as not as value adding, right? Let's say, let's say a secretary. However, the person who happens to occupy that position, so the position secretary, when we when we have it go through our linchpin position evaluation, it might generate 111, right? One, because it doesn't own a strategic objective. One, it's not core to operations. One, it's not mandated. So it's not a linchpin position. But the person who happens to occupy it is the one that actually practically holds the organization together, and that's the nature of some secretaries, right? They hold the an organization together without them, and that has nothing to do with their role. It has more to do with them as a person. So that's also somebody or a talent that you'll want to manage and protect because they're giving a lot more value far beyond their position. So this is an exercise that you want to do, trying to understand or identify your linchpin talents. So some examples again of indicators. We will have, let's say, maybe this linchpin talent, or in our example, this secretary has a wide network or of linkages. So we cannot afford this person to leave the organization because we will lose this value. Another could be this person happens to be really a critical thinker, far beyond what we require them to be. And so they're the ones that get ideas flowing, insights running. And then maybe third, they're very adaptable and flexible. We all want this in our organization, right? And it's the same exercise that you do when you look at the talents within an organization. You look at, let's say, let's begin comparing talents A, B, and C. They all perform far above the skill that you expect them to. But as you go, have them go through your criteria for linchpin talents, you find out that talent A doesn't have much linkages. They still have value, obviously. They're very much a critical thinker, not as high as maybe another, or as part of your expectations, and not doing well in terms of adaptability and flexibility. But then talent B turns out to really have this network, is very much a critical thinker and also adaptable and flexible compared to talent C. Um, Not a wide network, but very much a critical thinker and adaptable and flexible. The scores of A, talent B, and talent C are pretty close, right? So you can even consider talent C as a linchpin. And this can happen if you happen to assign weights maybe to your indicators to distinguish them a little bit more. But it's important that you don't, when you do this kind of evaluation, both for the position, linchpin position and linchpin talents, that you don't compare them against each other. You always compare them against the criteria, right? So you can say, talent C has more network against talent B. That's you're doing comparison between two talents. What you want to do is compare talent B with wide network and then talent C with wide network, right? So hopefully you get that, no? But it's always against the criteria, never against each other. Against each other is comparison, and it's not criteria based anymore. But based on this example, talent B is going to be the talent that we want to manage, right? So given these two, and again, you can have your own criteria. You will be able to distinguish which are your linchpin positions and which are your linchpin talents. And hopefully, through this, it can get you started in true talent management, or not true, but jumpstart your talent management. In what way specifically? Well, if you look back into this, we actually create sort of four possible combinations of linchpins or talents that we manage. For example, somebody could be occupying a linchpin position but is not a linchpin talent. Somebody could be a linchpin talent but not occupying a linchpin position. Or you could have a position that is not linchpin and it's being occupied by a talent who is also not a linchpin. There has to be a talent management approach for that as well. Or the fourth combination would be a linchpin position is occupied by a linchpin talent. Let's put that together in a sort of uh, drawing, right? So let's put that together here. So let's create four quadrants and let's put in this quadrant first our first condition. So it's not a linchpin position and it's not occupied by a linchpin talent. Again, based on your evaluation. So anybody in your organization could fall within this box. Let's say up here, it's a linchpin position, but the incumbent, the one that occupies it, turns out not to be a linchpin talent. And then maybe box three, not a linchpin position, but definitely a linchpin talent. And our example earlier was the secretary, right? So the secretary position, not a linchpin because based on our criteria, that position is not related to the mandate, is not responsible for any strategic objective or initiative, and it's also not core to operations. But they turn out to be critical thinkers, have a wide network, and adaptable and flexible, right? So they actually will fall under this box. Not a linchpin position, but definitely a linchpin talent. You'll want to do something about this talent, right? And then finally, over on top, we have our linchpin position and linchpin talent. Obviously, linchpin position and linchpin talent, that's where significantly many of our energies should go into when it comes to talent management because they happen to occupy a very critical position and they're also critical talents. But notice, once you start comparing all the other boxes, it still gives you an idea of how you should do talent management, except it's a little bit differentiated in terms of approach. Okay, let's move it. Let's try and illustrate that now. Okay, and before I proceed, if you're liking what we're covering, by the way, just make sure to um, hit the like button. Maybe even subscribe for more. I plan to do live sessions every month just to help HR and the OD professional and the L&D professional do much better in the work that they do. All right, and also maybe share this with some of your other colleagues. Okay, but then again, so linchpin, not a linchpin position, and not a linchpin talent. We're coloring it gray because while you will still want to put some energy and focus and resources into these kinds of talents, it's not going to be as what you might call aggressive, for lack of a better term, as aggressive or as deliberate as your approach for linchpin position and linchpin talent, which we colored green. Okay, so we're coloring it gray. Notice we didn't color it black because black might signal to you it's a danger zone or it's something that you want to avoid. We just colored it a bit gray. Then moving on. Let's color this one red. Red obviously is a color for alarm, a color for panic. And that's because if it's a linchpin position and the talent that happens to occupy that is not a linchpin talent, you want to really rethink about or do work on talent management very, very clearly. Because that person, the talent that occupies that linchpin position, could be compromising it, right? Could be putting it at risk. We have Maria Shalane Vergara over on chat. There you go, saying hi. Hello po. Hello there. Thank you for joining, right? So red because again, state of alarm. And then finally over at the bottom, linchpin positions, bottom right, not a linchpin position, but a linchpin talent. Again, going back to our secretary, what will you do with this secretary, right? Because nasasayang. The secretary happens to be a critical thinker. You can do more with that person versus somebody else who's not a linchpin. So in other words, there can be more value out of that person. So as a talent manager approach, really that clarifies it, right? So so now we have these four boxes with the four colors that distinguish how they are different and set apart in terms of your talent management approach, right? Now, what could be some of the things that we will implement in order to begin talent management for each of these boxes? So let's talk about that now. Okay, but first, let me just go through our chat box just to check if we have a couple of more questions or greets. And also, again, don't forget to like and subscribe and support the channel. I'd like to be able to do this again as regular as possible. So just make sure that you're able to do that. And just as a commercial, maybe, these live sessions are free. So if your organization is interested, you can contact me. I'll be putting some of my details later on in the description box below. So you can contact me through there and we can actually do a session with your organization if you want to. We do already have some planned sessions for October and November. So we could actually do some of our recordings maybe for the December or January sessions. But again, I'm really open to helping you out. So just let me know, right? Anyway, so let's go back and let's begin closing our session now. We still have about short of 30 minutes to go, but I'd like to be able to open some Q&A portion for some of you who might have a couple of questions, right? Okay, so now what I'm going to show you again are some of the strategies that you can end up implementing for each of the boxes, especially now that we understand the nature of their linchpin combinations. These might not be the entire slew or set of HR work that you're going to do, but at least it's going to help you become a little bit more laser focused in your approach. So, for example, in the gray box, so not a linchpin position, not a linchpin talent. So again, not a linchpin meaning these are the positions that are based on our definition, not mandated, not core to operations, and also they don't own any of the strategic initiatives or objectives. And also, they in terms of linchpin talent evaluation, they are not as adaptable or flexible as we want them to be. They are not as um, what were the other criteria that we had earlier? They were not critical thinkers and also didn't have a wide network. So it's not that they perform poorly. It again we wanted to set apart, right? So since they were not set apart, doesn't exactly mean they're not valuable to the organization. Remember, every position has a value in organization. If especially if you do your organization design correctly, there's always a rhyme and a reason for every position. However, since they don't fall under that criteria of linchpin, the best possible talent management approach we can do is our typical L&D, learning and development. So, a couple of development workshops, a couple of learning opportunities, that is sufficient for these kinds of talents. We're not forgetting them. We're still taking care of them. We're still helping them. And over time, maybe we can move them to a linchpin position. Over time, maybe they can become a linchpin talent. But again, colored gray because you're going to devote not as deliberate or not as much energy as all of the other boxes here. So what do we do with yellow? So after gray, we're going to focus on yellow. For the yellow ones, career development, right? Because it's a linchpin talent. And that linchpin talent happens to be in a position that is not a linchpin one. So we're wasting the talent. We're wasting the talent. So might as well have these talents go through a career, um, career, what you call this, session, um, career exposure, okay, just to be able to either move them to a more practical position. And then going to the red box, linchpin position, but not a linchpin talent. Red also means panic, or well, actually, yellow means panic. Red means maybe horror already. Let's do some sound effect for that horror, such as a gap, right? So that's something that we really want to take care of. And what we can do here is maybe begin thinking of replacements already or successors going into that position, right? Because we cannot afford that linchpin position to be occupied by a talent that's not linchpin. Now, of course, a not linchpin talent doesn't mean they are contributing um, less better than the linchpin talent, because even though you're not linchpin, you could actually still perform well enough to be able to justify why you're in that position. But there's much more leverage and traction if you, as an incumbent for that linchpin position, were also a linchpin. So definitely, L&D can go into your development as well. But if you don't meet that criteria, obviously, succession management has to be in the cards already. And then finally, our green box. And since we've been doing everything already in talent management, we've done L&D, career development, and succession management. Here we shift into rewards and recognition. It's really about capitalizing on the talent, making sure they're protected or they feel safe, they feel in the right environment so that they continue being a linchpin talent occupying that linchpin position. All right? So breathe in first and breathe out. And that's it. That's what we mean when we say talent management, or at least that's how you can jumpstart on talent management. Depending on the size of your organization, definitely it could take you certain number of steps or processes to be able to distinguish the linchpin talents and the linchpin positions and even do this very simple quadrant. But I tell you, it will be a clarifying step that you do in your organization, clarifying in such a way that now you know where your time, resources, and energy should go based on the distribution in the boxes. And also, you now can anticipate based on the development that you're doing how these talents will contribute to your customers, your processes, and your outcomes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, is how you can jumpstart talent management in your organization. Again, very simply, by focusing on the linchpins, the ones that hold the structure together. And again, by structure, we mean many things. The structure could be the organization per se, it could be certain policies, it could be certain frameworks in your organization, but distinguish them and by identifying, again, specifying your own standards to distinguish, identify them, and then put them in these quadrants and then begin doing your work in talent management. All right. So that's it. Actually, that's what I wanted to share. Hopefully, you've gotten some value here We are open for some questions. I'm not sure how many are watching live, however, but if you do have questions, you can put them over in the chat box. I'm probably going to wait for just a couple of seconds just to see if we will have a number of questions. Oh, we have one coming in. From Jeremy Raton, nice one. All right, thank you. So that's that's not a question, that's a comment. So thank you for that, Emil. Right? Some people are familiar because I did ask them to join. So we have a group, but we do have about 19 watching live right now. So thank you for that. So any more questions? Any more? We haven't received any questions, so there should be the word more. Any questions? All right. So if there's not going to be any question, I think at this point we could end up finishing our session already. So we're going to end a bit earlier than planned, just 15 minutes more. But again, hopefully, again, you've gotten some value around this. I will be doing another session. I think for October, the live session will be about the leader's role in capacity building. We've all heard, maybe for some of you, you have heard about the manager's role in capacity building, which is actually a little bit of what we covered, right? The DARE model. That's the manager's role in capacity building. The manager defines, assesses, realizes, and evaluates. That's what a manager does. But how is the leader's role different from the manager's role? So we're going to explore that. We're going to talk about that in the next live session. Well, speaking of that, I'm not sure if this is going to be live or just a post instead. And that's because, well, my October is a little bit full already, but we'll try and find time. I don't know if Saturday or Sunday to do there was a power failure. Uh, there was a power failure, but hopefully we're back and hopefully YouTube plugs this together. But we see some comments over chat. So let's try and read those. Thank you from Red. Glad you're here, Mark C. Thank you. Good job. For organizations, here's a tough question from Emil. For those organizations, let's post that over on the screen. Um, Right. So Emil was asking for organizations who are transitioning to a digital one, what will be the process? Actually, if you're transitioning, that's actually already a good time to begin doing the linchpin distinction at the onset, right?
Of course, your criteria will be related to that digital transformation. Like, not everybody will have the criteria that you expect for that transition. So specify that at the onset. Both again for the defining the linchpin position and also defining the linchpin talents. Great question over there. Let me know if you answered that. Thank you. Also, applauses. It's great to see you virtual from Red again. Red, I miss you. Let's get back and work again. Okay, some other comments. All right. Okay, so this looks good. This looks great in terms of questions, and again, hopefully we're coming back. Um, you're going to see this later on in the YouTube because it was cut in for a moment. Uh, but hopefully, again, you got the bulk anyway of our lesson. So that's it for our live session. Hope to see you again in our next. Don't forget again to subscribe and to um, hit like and also maybe some comments and also maybe watch the other videos of our channel. I don't have much talking head videos. I'm just starting doing talking head just a couple of weeks ago. But there will be a couple more posted in the coming weeks. I'm going to start a series on some of the mistakes I've made as a manager. So hopefully some of you can learn from that. I've done dozens of mistakes. So hopefully that's going to help you learn from me. learn matuto kayo sa kapalpakan ko. Right? So we're going to talk about that. But then I do have a lot of animated shorts as well, some stuff that I use for some of my workshops as supplemental material. So hopefully you can get value from there as well. But at this point, really, I just want to thank you for joining our session today. And again, hopefully you found some value in our webinar. Salamat po ng marami. I'll be staying here for a couple of more seconds, but for some of you can probably you can exit and go back to your work and maybe begin doing the linchpin identification of both your positions and your talents. Good luck to you in your work. Again, my name is Lito, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.